We would now like to move on to our final session for this day, corporate philanthropy collaborations for social impact driven project design and delivery. CSR as a concept has moved over these years from mere philanthropy that reflect the personal interests of individual senior executives to actionable projects that realize the opportunities for significantly shared value creation achieved through smart partnering. This idea requires many stakeholders to come together and the key for each party to tap into the resources and expertise of another. One such collaboration is between corporate leaderships and dedicated philanthropists. With both being driven by the common goal of social good, it remains to see if a collaborative canvas equipped with shared knowledge and resources can be crafted to ensure sustainable long term impact. So let's hear from some leaders who can shed light on corporate philanthropy collaborations. To moderate this session, I would like to invite Ms. Sana Sheikh, Director Investor Relations at United Way Mumbai. Ms. Sheikh leads investor relations at UWM, a premier non-profit organization with a vast footprint in urban and rural communities across the country. UWN has invested INR 480 plus crore in the areas of education, health, income, environment, public safety, and social inclusion. Prior to joining UWM, Ms. Sheikh was CEO of ASIMA, a leading education-focused NGO. Thank you for being here, Ms. Sheikh. Our first speaker for this evening is Ms. Priya Kapadia, Head Marico Innovation Foundation, Marico Limited. Over the past 7 years, Ms. Kapadia has conceptualized multiple programs that support innovations in their journey towards creating real and measurable impact. Her response includes sector and challenge-specific programs in the form of Innovate to Cultivate to support innovation in agriculture, and more recently, the Innovate to Beat COVID challenge in response to the pandemic crisis. Lovely to have you join us, Ms. Kapadia. Our second speaker this evening is Mr. Nehal Sanghvi, Senior Advisor for Innovations and Partnerships, USAID. Mr. Sanghvi has served with USAID since August 2012. He has more than 15 years of professional experience in international law, business, and development. Prior to joining USAID, he was the COO of Gateway House, Indian Council of Global Relations, India's first independent foreign policy think tank. Lovely to have you, Mr. Sanghvi. Up next, we have Mr. Samar Verma, Program Officer at the Ford Foundation. Mr. Verma leads the program portfolios on public interest technologies, future of workers, and philanthropy. He has 25 years of professional experience in the corporate sector, conducting policy research, leading think tank, international development, and research grant management based in India and UK. He was the global head of economic justice policy at Oxfam Great Britain, leading their global work on trade, agriculture, and climate change. Lovely to be hosting you, Mr. Verma. Our final speaker this evening is Mr. Sudarshan Suchi, Chief Executive Officer at Save the Children India. Mr. Suchi is a seasoned civil society leader with 3 decades of local to global experience in academics, development, and corporate settings, and an authority in participatory practices to empower communities to lead transformation. He comes equipped with the core competency of conceptualizing development programs, development-based business models, efficient resource mobilization, and establishing partnerships. It's lovely to have you join us, Mr. Suchi. I would once again like to remind all our panelists that this session runs till 7:15 p.m. Please reserve some time towards the end for some questions. Over to you, Ms. Sheikh.
Looks like we may have lost Sana there.
I think there might have dropped.
Yeah, she might have been dropped. While we're waiting for her to rejoin, maybe we could quickly just take 1 minute each to introduce ourselves and what we're up to and why we think that there's importance in collaboration. And then hopefully Sana will be back by then. So maybe because I have the floor, I'll just go first. As mentioned, my name is Nehal Sanghvi. I'm with USAID. And we strongly believe in the power of collaborative giving at USAID. We build multi-stakeholder platforms throughout our mission. We're engaged with those platforms with health, water, sanitation, clean energy, environment, and most notably, economic recovery efforts post-COVID-19 or because of COVID-19. So I'm happy to talk more about that as the session goes. It looks like Sana may be back, so let me then hand it over to Sana.
Apologies for the disconnected start, but thank you everybody for being here. And I'm so glad all of you could stay on, even though I know this has probably been a very full day with a lot of virtual sessions and a lot of screen time. We are going to try and make this a very practical conversation and draw from the real insights that our panelists have from implementing programs on the ground. We know that partnerships and collaboratives aren't really as perfect and easy as we often make them seem when we talk about or report on their successes. It's hard really to build consensus with a large number of stakeholders, get everybody on the same page. I believe Bridgespan called it the collaboration conundrum, where conceptually, all of us in the development sector know and believe that our programs would benefit by the resources or the expertise of other organizations. Yet this happens to be the exception really, and not the norm to the kind of work that we do in the sector. There are few organizations that have managed to do this and are managing to build programs in a more collaborative fashion and are executing this across the country. And our panelists represent organizations such as these. So I'm hoping over the next 40 minutes, we can draw on some of their experiences on why they collaborate to begin with, what kind of conditions one really needs to create to make sure your collaboration is impactful, and what are the obstacles that you face along the way and how you overcome those. Priya, I thought we could start with you. When we were speaking earlier, you had remarked how this was such a surprise to you when you shifted over from the corporate sector. You had expected everybody to be working in perfect harmony and cohesion, and it wasn't the case. Tell us about your early observations when you joined the sector and how that has really shaped the work that you do at Marico.
Thank you, Sana. It's a very important question. And before that, hi Nihal, hi Sudarshan, hi Samar. Good to see you all here. Very delighted to be on this podium with each of you. So I was mentioning to Sana when I had my conversation with her on Friday, saying that when I moved from the corporate world, and I have about 15 years of corporate experience working with Citi and with the Economic Times and with in an advertising agency, and I just thought that there was such a competitive, world over there, that when I join a foundation, because the intention of the foundation is always towards good, whatever be the definition of good they see, whether it's innovation for MIF or any other definition that any other foundation works, believes in, I always felt that there'd suddenly be a, like a huge collaboration that's there, and each one is talking to each other, each one is working together. Conversations are free flowing. Everybody is waiting for, somebody to come and saying, I have an idea, let's work together. And I was really aghast to see that nobody really was talking to each other. They were all talking about their organization, but not to each other. And that kind of surprised me. That was my initial shock and awe moment, when I moved from the business to the social sector. And I really felt that I wished people could collaborate. But I think over the last few years, I have seen collaborations happen, and I've seen collaborations happen even within the foundation and otherwise. You suddenly see a lot of people coming in together and working towards a cause. And I think it is probably because the time is now ripe. I think the belief is now deeply set in, especially with foundations, because a lot of foundations maybe began focusing on CSR good, probably because of the CSR mandate. And then they began working as individuals. And then they realized that the challenges are too large for an individual. And it's important that you work together and not just you and your NGO, you or your startup, etc. And then I feel that now there's a lot more cohesion happening, a lot more conversations happening, a lot more exchange of best practices.
Last few years that we see more of this happening, a lot of these that we saw during the pandemic as well. And I think the speed of response of the civil society organizations during the pandemic was quite impressive. I believe of all the collaboratives in India, most of them are under 5 years old. So they are relatively new. But Nehal, you've been talking about this for much longer. You've been advocating for collective action, both as part of your role at USAID as well as in your previous organizations. Tell us about the collaborative that you're working on to support informal sector workers, and perhaps also dwell on why you chose this model. Why did you believe that this partnership was really the best way in which USAID could address the issue?
Yeah, thanks, Sana. Thank you and hello to all the other panelists as well. As Priya just said, there's no doubt that this trend is something that we've seen an uptick in recent years. And fundamentally, partnership is hell. I mean, a wise man said that once, and I totally believe that. It's not easy to do things when you have conflicting, from a donor perspective, especially a government donor perspective. Not only do you have conflicting sort of metrics that you're going to be measuring and reporting practices, but you actually have all sorts of bureaucracy you've got to navigate internally within the mission as well, that involves a whole range and a whole host of players who are not directly related to what is happening on the ground, but are worried about internal processes. And all of that's very important. But then to work through or work with a multi-stakeholder alliance and have our partners also navigate those internal processes is a challenge. And so I can understand how folks may at times want to shy away from these collaborative opportunities. Having said that, it's happening, as you mentioned, Sana, it's happening more and more, and we're happy to see these 1,000 sort of droplets of good turn into a stream. And I think that turning into a stream is critical. One example is something that I just alluded to while we lost you for a bit. I started to introduce myself and this multi-stakeholder platform that we recently launched. In fact, I'm so happy to say that even with the panelists that are here on the screen in front of me, we are involved with a collaborative opportunity with Marico on something called the Millennium Alliance. Summer, it's nice to see you. And one thing that we were involved with Ford Foundation on, and unfortunately, currently Ford Foundation is not a partner on this platform called the Revive platform, but it is something that Ford Foundation helped us conceptualize at the beginning. And hopefully they'll come back to be able to come back once their legal teams clear, come back to the platform. It's a fantastic platform that we've started in response to the massive hit that India has had as a result of COVID-19. And it's a platform that brings together Michael Susan Dell Foundation, Omidyar Networks, USAID, soon to have DFID join in their official capacity. I think we're just at the last minute stages with them, probably 24 corporates, as well as folks from the diaspora. And it's a platform that engages in what may be the largest experiment ever in India for returnable grants. And so what we've done is we've mapped out the spectrum of informal sector workers that are in the most vulnerable, that need plain old vanilla grant assistance, then those that just need some bridge or mezzanine support to get over the pandemic before they're able to get back on their feet, before they're able to start generating some income again, and are able to get some grant support that they're happily able to return within a short amount of time. Could be 6 months, could be 9 months, could be a year, depending on the cohort. And then there'll be some folks that actually need some technical assistance, some skilling, perhaps, or upskilling assistance to be able to avail of higher paying jobs once the economy is back to where it was. Then we're going to be able to then slot in folks that are looking for low cost debt, and then eventually commercial capital. And the beautiful thing about this platform is everybody that I mentioned that's part of it, and my invitation now is to Marico. I would love for you guys to join as well. But everybody that's a part of it gets to decide how they're spending their resources. So for example, if a paint company is interested in ensuring that painters are getting the support they need to bridge these tough times, then their cohort may be entirely focused on painters receiving X amount of resources in the form of grants or returnable grants for the time frame of a year, for example. If carpenters are interested, then maybe it's a company that's involved in carpenter supplies. If it's automotive supplies that a particular company produces, then automotive mechanics may be able to avail of these resources. So really, it's an interesting way where we all, as funders, whether it be CSR, foundations, high net worth individuals, the diaspora, et cetera, get to pick and choose because really the need is everywhere, and everybody can play nice in the sandbox when there's some honest brokers in the room. And I think all of the partners that are there have provided that service. And again, I know future partners will do the same. So it's a great platform. Happy to talk more about it in detail or other things. But Sana, you're absolutely right. It's not easy, but it is critical. Thanks.
It sounds like an absolutely mammoth exercise just to bring all of those people in one room or one virtual room, even to have a call and think through how this really would work. And then you've managed to offer the kind of flexibility that CSR often craves, where you can support a particular target group or a particular segment of the population. So it isn't this cookie cutter model, but you're able to really navigate and find your own space within that. That would be interesting to touch upon if we manage to do that later. It sounds, as from an implementer's perspective, it sounds like a dream to be part of. And it also sounds a little bit like a nightmare, because how do you really navigate all of these different views and opinions of different stakeholders? Sudarshan, you wear both of these hats. You wear the hat of a large foundation and also of an implementer. And you clearly have great subject matter expertise in the kind of work that you do. Why would an organization such as yours seek out or want to be part of these kind of collaborators where you have to manage all of these different expectations and views?
Sana, I bring both good news and bad news. And first, in terms of collaboration, partnership, network, if in the development sector, if you look at the people whom we are serving, their lives don't exist in compartments, or they don't say, oh, today is the day for education, let me see which organization is going to serve me on that. Oh, there's a pneumonia thing, so I'll today address that, or the girl child or the boy child or the wife, the husband, the livelihood, or house, shelter, there's that. These are all first silos created by us in our own zeal of, in whatever of serving, and then we try to put them together as a collaboration, as coming together. I think the controllers of resources, probably we need to lower our guard in terms of, so if we are to have a meaningful engagement and a holistic transformation lasting, then everything around a marginal household needs to be addressed. So there's no way but to collaborate. I mean, maybe our skills, competencies, and limited resources get us to work on different parts. But if we want to make lasting change around where the problem is, if we want to be a part of a lasting solution, there's no way but to cooperate. And on the flip side, most of us in urban areas live in housing societies or housing cooperatives. Least cooperative you'll find. I mean, from settling a dustbin onwards, people struggle, parking lots and other things. So that means culturally, naturally, cooperation, networking, or coalition is not something that's first sought after. It's almost resisted, although the name is there. And going beyond that, there's also, so the other part which I want to flag and mention is that increasingly the ability to listen in, or rather, I mean, it's a tongue twister, the ability to listen into the ground to people in distress has been reducing. So when we enhance our, I mean, if you look at this platform as an example, you said we have time till 7:15 and we need to save a few minutes for people to respond. So if we are going to exhaust on our side everything to be said, there's very little time for, and typically almost all platforms in last few years I have seen 35 minutes of speaking, 3 minutes of trying to listen into what somebody else is. I think we have a challenge. We need to break those mindsets and throw things open, disrupt, so that we start listening in. Great coalitions, cooperation, network will happen. Coming to the positive side, I think the moment resources get shared, knowledge gets shared, and the moment we reach out, the first and the foremost partnership is with communities and networking. The ownership and the stakeholders become large of the same context. And that is almost like building a strong foundation for anything to do. You can build a grand water harvesting structure, but a community institution built with a lower cost over a longer period is one which will get that water harvesting structure to last. So I mean, also I'll commit the folly of going on speaking. So I'll pause here. But what I'm saying is there is merit in cooperation, there is merit in networking and coalition, and yet it takes a huge generosity for us to accommodate multiple plurality of approaches, views, and choices to make that actually happen. And yeah, so that's why. But I believe in it that it's the only solution for a lasting transformation. Sana,
Yeah.
this is my
I
bit,
think
right?
you highlighted so well, Sudarshan, one of the real key reasons to collaborate. And that's the boldness of the ambition. If your ambition and the objective that you want to accomplish is niche targeted, you want to adopt one school, you want to green one patch of land, you can find individual organizations to do it. But when your ambition is as bold as every child must have the rights that they are entitled to, you know that this can't be something that one agency or one organization does alone, which is really the key motivator, perhaps to bring everybody together. And yes, like you said, it requires immense patience, it requires commitment, because this isn't going to materialize overnight. I think there are two phases of collaboratives. One is the coming together, where you're trying to get everybody around a table, get their views to align, and a common mission and strategy to be agreed on. And then, of course, there is the working together, which is the longer goal. Somewhere in the coming together phase, when you have companies partner with foundations such as Ford Foundation, what do you feel the company brings to the table, and what is it that they rely on Ford or other foundations for expertise on?
Well, thanks, Sana, first of all, and my hello to all the co-panelists and 235 odd participants I see on this. It's amazing to see people are still interested at this hour of the day. Many of who I'm sure would have spent the entire day before the screen. So my hats off commitment that people have. I truly appreciate that, and I also again thank the organizers for having. It's lovely to see so many friends, visuals on the screen, but also so many friends' names popping up on the screen here and there, because I've worked in the corporate sector for a long time, and a lot of CSR colleagues, ex-colleagues are friends. So it's a delight to be here. Let me just begin by saying, when talking of collaboration, I cannot, every time I think about collaboration, I cannot but be reminded of what somebody said about 25 years ago, and he was talking about how the hell that collaboration is. Hell put it, and he said that the productivity of one Indian standing alone is almost the same as 10 Japanese put together. But if you put 10 Indians together, their collective productivity is less than that of one Japanese. And that is a very telling statement. And I cannot but help be reminded of this every time I think about it. Particularly, I must say, when I began to observe children playing on the playground, I began to realize that we are born collaborators. You look at children, the way they, no matter what, they will find a way to collaborate themselves. They will fight, they will argue, but they will come to terms with whatever reality that they commonly agree to. So there is something which is part of us, and that we lose as we progress in our careers, perhaps because of the kind of education we receive, perhaps because of resource constraints, perhaps because of competitiveness. I don't know. There could be many factors behind this, but we somehow begins to lose, and that makes collaboration so much more difficult. Um, I will also, Nehal gave a very good example, and thank you for sharing that, Nehal, because I was thinking about this very program, Revive, when thinking about collaborations. And indeed, we remain very proud of our association with Revive, and we are hopeful that at some point we'll be, formally associating with this exercise, even though we had the opportunity of co-designing this workshop, this program. And in this program, if I could just pick this example, Sana, to talk about and respond to the specific question that you raised. There are quite a few things that international foundations like Ford bring in. let me just take 1 minute to tell this audience something very interesting, which is, when people approach Ford Foundation, they typically approach us as an international foundation. And then they talk to us and say, okay, how do you collaborate with CSR? I want to remind everybody that Ford Foundation itself is born out of a CSR initiative. Ford Foundation is, the history, the origin, the ethos of Ford Foundation actually goes down to a corporate, Ford Motor Company. When in 1936, a small gift was given and foundation was set up subsequently. It was a CSR, formal CSR wing of Ford Motor Company that was set up. And of course, Ford Motor family members continued to be on the board and decision-making positions in Ford Foundation until 1974. So, we have a very strong kind of genesis of CSR and corporate link to philanthropy. And yet we have come a long way. So much so that, the presence and brand of Ford Foundation today is seen completely independent of the Ford Motor Company. And that's how it should be, because, there's been a lot of years and decades of effort that has gone into it. Part of that reason is to do with the patient capital and the transformative systemic thinking that Ford has been very proud of. So, we don't go into incremental changes. I mean, Revive, for instance, is one program that you will see when it unfolds, will be transformative. It already is beginning to transform the lives of people. It's transforming the space in which jobs are created. It's transforming the way corporates think about not only collaboration, but also job market and labor market and, good and decent jobs. Likewise, we've been in the business of creating institutions. I mean, humility aside, more than 45 Nobel Prize winners in the last 80 years have been funded by Ford Foundation. That's not a small achievement. How has it all happened? This has happened in collaboration with corporates. And this has also happened because we have insisted bringing in what we call as patient capital. Results, Sudarshan is very right. Results do not come out within a matter of 6 months or 1 year. And that's the first thing that CSR and companies need to realize. There is no shareholder capitalism, quarterly returns that you can look forward to. If that's what you want to do, you are absolutely in the wrong area. This is not, where you need to think about quarterly returns and annual returns. It's not going to work. That's the first thing that, we bring to the table, which is, bringing that value, that experience, that knowledge on why it is important to think long-term, why it is important to actively listen, and why it is important to be humble in what we bring to the table. Humility is an important attribute. It's people who know what the solutions are. It's people on the ground, the local context. They know the local solutions better than we do. We should have that humility to not only acknowledge, but to actually appreciate and constantly seek solutions where they exist, as opposed to handing over solutions. So don't be like that carpenter who has a hammer and is kind of looking for a nail. And these are the kind of attributes that we bring in to any kind of collaborations, including to CSR companies. And this is also a message that I wanted to bring through this platform, Sana, to all people on this group, that it's important to think about some of these common values. It's important to identify a common champion, as in the case of Revive, and it's a very good point that you raised and Nehal was talking about. All of this of collaborators that exists in a program like this cannot function unless there is a champion, unless the people who are behind the champions empower them and entrust them with responsibility. Trust them. Once you identify them, empower them, then trust them to take it forward. Create them as champions. It's a part of collaborative process. If it happens, a lot of that ownership, which is what brings the transformation from a collaborative into a well-designed, sustainable solution. So let me just stop here for the moment. And that's the key message I think I wanted to bring. Thank you.
I like what you mentioned, Samar, about patient capital. And that is of so much value for any new innovation or intervention that is hoping to find its place. You also spoke about finding those champions and really supporting them. Nehal, talk us through what is the role of the core funder or the fund. What is it that you're really expecting them to do? Because in navigating these many different stakeholders would be their primary responsibility. How does it work with the fund manager? What is their role and what is your expectation of them?
Great, thanks, Sana, again for this opportunity to speak. You know, as Samar just mentioned, the being humble and empowering the champion is critical. USAID is not the most important player in this program by any means. Neither is Omidyar, neither is Michael Susan Dell, or any of the corporates that I mentioned. The trust deficit is being overcome because of the implementing partner. They're the true champion that's being able to pull other funders to this platform, and that is Samhita, or the Collective Good Foundation. Kudos to a phenomenally strong implementing partner who bridges that trust deficit, that addresses really issues that folks may have with making sure that there is a meeting of the minds with all the folks involved, not only from the funding side, but certainly more importantly from the intermediary and beneficiary side. But B, in addition to the meeting of the minds, they are truly acting as the honest broker in the room. And I think that's critical. And so I saw in your chat box, somebody asked a question just a couple of minutes ago about maybe sending the website or the web address about Revive. Let me just say, Revive is being housed by Samhita, Collective Good Foundation. Samhita is no stranger to the folks in the room right now or to the folks on this chat. If you're interested in finding out more information about Revive, please contact Samhita. You're welcome to contact me as well directly. But please contact Collective Good Foundation, which is the sister organization of Samhita. Priya Nayak, who leads that entire team, has just done an exceptional job being that honest broker. And so to your point, Sana, I think they're the champion that we're here to support. So our role as a funder is to help ensure that we're providing the resources to the platform that are needed for them to expand the good work they're doing. And fundamentally, sometimes those resources tend to be limited by corporates or by others to be spent for what the corporate's interests are. But from a funder's perspective, maybe we have a little bit more flexibility so we can spend significant resources on the monitoring and evaluation. Unless it's an iterative process where the platform continues to iterate regularly, early and often, we're not going to get the results we need. We're not going to be able to prove this model out. So our M&E platform partners for this initiative are JPAL and Georgetown University. So that's one role the funders are playing, is to help ensure robust M&E practices and the right partners in the room. But fundamentally, we're just there to support Collective Good and Samhita to do the great work they've already been doing in such a short amount of time to attract more credible partners to the platform.
I think that faith in the implementing partner allows them to do so much more. And being part of a collaborative like this almost becomes their calling card for the next fund grant that they try to apply for. Have you seen that, Priya, that the kind of organizations and the innovators that you support, are they able to really leverage the recognition that you have provided to their projects?
I think I'll go beyond just the organizations that I've recognized. So as MIF, what we do is we work with startups and we help them scale their business. We don't give funds to them. So our arena is largely in the startup world. We understand that sector really well. We're not really necessarily with the not-for-profit sector. We're mostly with the startup sector. So over the last few years, we've built a network where we reach out if a funder if one of our organizations requires, support to figure out how he should work on his VC deck. We work with an accelerator to help him. We work with incubators if an incubating organization wants, has got a portfolio that we can scale up and if they're truly innovative. So we've always had these loose collaborations, we have like a list of organizations that we typically reach out to, whether it's Pilgrow, whether it's SINIIT. We speak to each one of them regularly and we have conversations with them. Millennial Alliance is another such entity of FICCI that we keep speaking to. And we built like this loose conversation with each other. But this actually came together very seamlessly during the COVID pandemic. The moment COVID happened and we had the shutdown around the 20th of March, MIF decided that we had to do something, because we require innovative solutions to help the medical fraternity. But we were new in the medical sector, and we had no idea about PPE kits and ventilators, etc. So we began reaching out to each of these loose collaborations and conversations that we've had in the past, and we kept speaking to each one of them to see what can we do, how can we do it, and that's how we launched the COVID challenge that has seen fantastic innovations being funded by us and AT Chandra and Mr. Harsh Mariwala. But the journey of doing that is largely through loose collaborations. And I'm a big believer of collaborations, but I'm a little concerned about signing deals and not having to do anything. I rather have loose conversations and collaborations such that things really work very effectively for us. So, for example, we had no idea where to get our technical experts to. I picked the phone up, spoke to BIRAC, they knew people, they connected us with them, we got our technical experts. We weren't sure where do we get our startups from. We spoke to all the incubations, accelerators, Atal Innovation Missions in India, the Agni team. So we spoke to all of them. They began, spreading the word around. It just became very, very seamless, and it became like a movement as far as this program was concerned. And I think it's because the intent was very strong and the agenda was very, very urgent and immediate. So to answer your question, it is very possible, it always happens that organizations that we have either accoladed or we have scaled up, or who are working with us for the COVID challenge, etc., they've seen success either with Marico or externally through our intervention and our connections. Now what we're thinking of doing is, since we've seen this beautiful amalgamation of conversation happening with the COVID challenge, we're actually seeing how we can create structured conversations with various entities and see how we can speak to them individually and as collectively as a group. And I think that is the next step as far as innovating enterprises are concerned.
You spoke about loose collaborations and how it evolves really organically over time, and you figure out what the needs are on both sides of the table, and you're able to grow from there. For many organizations that are implementing programs on ground, the pressure that you experience from wanting to prove that this project works or to show outcomes and impact very soon doesn't really allow for those kind of collaborations, unless there is a donor with a very high level of maturity who's willing to stick it out and really see it through with you. Sudarshan, we've all heard of donors or others asking us, what is the impact of your education program 6 months into the project, for example, or why isn't it already sustainable? How do you, and particularly I imagine in the case of collaborators where there is so much attention, that there is this heightened need for us to show that all of these hoops we jumped through to be part of this collaborative were really worth it. How do you set these kind of milestones, keep the expectations realistic and also show results? How do you manage that with the funders?
So first of all, I think you can never have a sport or a game where you make all the rules so that you can win. I'm just going a big principle. So there are donors or people with resources, and if we are going to them, we've got to respect that they will come with their conditionalities and with varying parts, short term, long term, mid term. Do we take a position that short term is not good enough, we can't go, or only we want like this, or no? I think the way we have looked at it from, let's say, SAVE's perspective, Save India, first of all, we love plurality and diversity. Therefore, donors of all kind and partners in implementation of all kind is what we see. What it takes is to help find a vocabulary which can connect to each one. So I would say if you have a donor who has a bandwidth of 6 months engagement or 6 weeks or something, there is something that happens. What we need to do is to make sure changes of the kind which happen in a day or two, or in 6 months or 6 years, or behavioral changes, physical activity changes, transformational changes, they all structure differently. So our ability to respect the donor's ask and use that space to, I think education may be sounding very condescending, but join in with the donor. I mean, while respecting, provide them the journey that's feasible. And I think it's very necessary to be honest and transparent. I, it's not just donors. I mean, starting across the world, I think transparency, consistency, and honesty does pay off with everybody. I mean, if you are vulnerable, you are struggling with some things that they're not happening that way, there is a willingness if your demonstrated sincerity of purpose is there. In short, Sana, even if the donor is there on a short haul with you, we must view the donor with a long haul. The relationship need not start and stop with some, financial input. So if you view a long-term relationship, sooner or later it evolves into one, and the donors also come around, because the donor are also coming forward wanting to participate in change. So it's in some way maybe the visibility they have of changes of the kind which they see in short, context. So I think we need to engage. I mean, we need to actively engage, and engage not just in a one-way traffic, but listening in, articulating, getting them to listen together, actually observations from field to share. Most importantly, I think failures need to be celebrated more often. Shortcomings, failures, and all, we need to embrace. I wish we could all donate a chapter in annual reports just to learn from that and then build on that. Otherwise, we'll be operating at top of the pyramid of corrections. There we resist each other. So I personally come from that, and I have huge faith. And SAVE has been very fortunate in getting such donors, national and international, who understand and who join in through the processes and help us, by struggling in our struggles with us. Thanks. So, yes, Anna.
I love what you say about communicating and communicating failures as well. Because only when we're really honest about the kind of work that we do can we expect our donors, our funders, our collaboratives to have a real picture of what the challenges are on ground. Since we have very little time left, what I would request each of you to do is perhaps take a minute to share your last thoughts and end with sharing how people in our audience can reach out to you or contact you. If this wasn't a virtual summit, as you exited the stage, we would have people coming up to you and offering their cards and trying to get a moment of your attention and your time. So perhaps for each of your organizations, what is the best way to reach out to you? Do you like people reaching out to you on LinkedIn? Should they respond to your RFP? Should they send you an email? So perhaps just give a little thought on how people should connect with you and your last remarks. Samar, can we start with you?
Sure, thank you. So the easier one first. It's best to reach me via email, and all of my details are available on the Ford Foundation website. So just log into Ford Foundation website. So, but it's easiest to connect via email rather than any other. Just two things perhaps to close, Sana. One is I wanted to reaffirm the importance of several things that have been said when we are looking at collaboration. So the importance of being truthful, honest, importance of being transparent, importance of identifying champions, empowering and entrusting them, I think are very critical is one. Second, it's important to, just as Sudarshan said that perhaps we should have a chapter in the annual report on failures, we should perhaps have, as each of the CSR, some fund which should be allowed for making experiments. It should not necessarily be only evaluated on the basis of success. Allow them to fail. If you're not failing enough, you're not doing a good job. There clearly is a lot of laggardness in the approach, and I think it's important. And the third thing I wanted to say is it's important to understand that, philanthropy is the offspring of modern capitalism. So, in a way, what I'm saying is, don't think of philanthropy and capitalism as two legs which are, independent of each other. They actually very, very closely are related. So if you're wanting to do genuine philanthropy, and when I say philanthropy, I don't mean funders, I mean the actual change that we are all working towards, we're wanting to see in the society. Not just look at the CSR as if CSR is independent of everything else I do in my corporate world. Unless you incorporate socially responsible practices in your business activity, philanthropy will need to exist, and that will be unfortunate. Thank you.
Thank you, Samar. Nehal?
Yeah, thank you again, Sana, and the organizers, CSR Box, and all the panelists. My final remarks are that just like we do a gender analysis or a sustainability analysis, or maybe even in some cases a partnership analysis, just following on the same theme about failure, I think we should also be doing a risk analysis and to help ensure that we're taking enough risks, because I don't think we are. I totally agree with what Summer said. We need to fail and fail fast, and we're not failing enough, and we're not advertising our failures enough. I foresee a fail fest. I foresee a fail fest at convenings like CSR Box, hopefully next year. I hope Bhumik is listening, but I want to see a panel where we're only talking about failures. And then the biggest failure gets the biggest award for that panel, because we don't talk about this enough. And at all the convenings that take place every year, whether it be Sankalp or this or the myriad of other ones that take place, I would like to see failure and risk be discussed more and more often. And I would like for the community of practice to come up with a risk appetite that becomes the industry standard. Right now, we don't have that. I wish it was 10%, 20%, 15%, whatever number arises, but I would like to us then aspire to that amount of failure. As far as getting in touch with me goes, you can get in touch with me through the website. Otherwise, my email address is nsangbi, my first initial, then my last name, nsanghabi @usaid.gov. But thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Nehal. Sudarshan?
Yeah. Sudarshan.suchi@savethechildren.in, and maybe the organizers can share it, both my mobile number and the mail. I'm good with WhatsApp messages, would dread calls coming now and then or calling people, without having an option. But all the rest of the information I would love to, the spirit of this whole session is in fact networking, collaboration, coalitions, and which can happen only when we talk to each other more. On the first part, I think there is a huge potential of, so my thing is that with every donor, so I would, as a receiver, like with every donor to create that donors, a group of the collaborators who can collaborate between themselves also. A donor facilitating a group of implementers to come together who are in different sectors, because every donor likes to put resources in multiple initiatives. So I think a lot can happen as an exchange between the receivers without even resources being exchanged. So when you're working in a livelihood project, if somebody from health and education and child rights can pull into the same area, and then the cross-pollination reverse, I think a lot of, so to say, words which I dread, scale and spread, can happen innocuously without just putting numbers. It can actually happen in terms of physical field. So that part, and I think the knowledge collaterals, I wish we come together to organize them. There is a huge collateral of knowledge in last 30, 35, 40 years of intense development work, and there is a reinvention of wheel every time. So I wish if we could just bring in, launch a platform for all this. Somewhere we have that bandwidth. Maybe I'm going to tap Nehal, Samar, or somebody else and persuade them to help us take this up. Priya too. Yeah, thank you. So that's the expectation, and yeah, thanks, Anna.
Thank you. I think we're making
Sana,
the agenda
sorry,
for next year's summit quite well in this panel. Sorry, Samar.
No, sorry. Just allow me half a minute, because I think what Sudarshan said, I just want to share with Sudarshan and of course the wider audience that indeed at Ford Foundation, as part of our philanthropic initiative, one of the key things that we are planning to do is to actually bring together philanthropic community much more in a much more institutional, systematic, and regular manner. There are several efforts that we have made in this regard, and hopefully, we'll be able to provide that kind of long-term support. That's what we are looking for. So not just bringing together, but also looking at ways in which we could create more awareness and create more data and evidence about what does philanthropy in India mean. So thank you.
That would be very interesting. Priya?
So I'll again go with my learnings that I've had with the various programs that we've done. I feel for a collaboration to work really well, one needs to have very strong clarity of vision. What is it that you wish to achieve? And what is the impact that you wish to achieve? Once you get that in place, then you automatically start looking at who you can co-create this program with. Again, I think another very important thing for a collaboration is co-creation. You create something and then you go and ask people to support, then they become outside supporters and not part of your dream, part of your vision, part of what you want to achieve. And part of what you think you can't do it alone. Why are you collaborating? Because you can't do it alone, right? You think you can't achieve that. So then how do you then create this confluence of people coming together to be able to achieve a common goal is largely through co-designing and not doing things unilaterally or by yourself. The third thing I think is trust, and I think each of the members other panelists have mentioned this in the past. Trusting that your other person is saying whatever your partners are saying is for the benefit of the common goal and not for themselves. The fourth thing is, though you may have a large collaborative in place, the collaborative needs to have the ability to and the agility to pivot if there's a change in the way things are working. If there's something that you need to completely differently move in a different direction, the ability to pivot needs to happen. That will probably happen if you're co-designing with clarity of vision and there's trust around all the collaborators. Another thing that I feel, Sana, is that a clear role definition. I think that is really important for collaborations, because if you bring 4 people who are doing the same thing, then they'll compete. It just gets very confusing, and what is one's role? So role definition, I think, is really, really important. I would agree with Samar about the Sutradhar, or that one player who will take the whole thing. I think even Nehal mentioned this, will take the whole thing and run. And Sudarshan, you're absolutely right. You either succeed or you learn. There is no such thing as failure. So I think that mindset needs to be very intrinsic in the definition or the agenda of the collaboration. And I think if you have that in place, theoretically, it looks like we may have something interesting coming up. That's to answer your first question. And the second question, you can catch me on LinkedIn. My email ID is priya.kapadia@marico.com. You can reach out to me. You can go onto the MIF website and contact me through the contact us form. I'll be accessible. Don't worry.
Thank you, Priya. You summed it up so beautifully. You spoke about common goals, about clarity both of purpose as well as roles, the ability to trust each other and work collaboratively, and to be able to pivot or course correct. And I think the only one thing I would perhaps would like to add is commitment, and having this long-term commitment when you enter partnerships like this, get into it for the long haul. And that's when you'll really see these transformative results. I'm so glad we could end the conversation on collaboration with all of this information shared on how people can collaborate with you and reach out to each of you. So we walk the talk really, and when they do reach out, perhaps there may be new opportunities that emerge over there.